Today I had the great privilege of talking to Jessica Retis. Jessica is professor at the University of Arizona and has had a great career spanning multiple continents, both as a media and communication studies scholar and as a media professional. She said so many things that really stuck with me, that I'm full of ideas and emotion. But one thing in particular made the conversation absolutely fascinating for me, which is when I asked her, what was her secret sauce, what that made her become the successful scholar and professional that she is today. She said mentorship. The mentorship that she's received that empowered her to succeed in this journey. And I think that's the mentorship that she's given now to so many students, to professionals, the mentorship that makes a difference in one person at a time, but also in the field as a whole. So I invite you to continue listening to this podcast to discover Jessica Retis' career and her remarkable journey of being mentor and mentoring others. What's the experience of being a Latinx scholar in the field of communication and media studies? What are the main challenges and opportunities that come with our identities? These are the issues that we'll talk about in El Café Latinx, where some of the leading voices in the field will share their professional experiences. Hola, my name is Pablo Boczkowski. I teach at Northwestern University, where I hold the Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani Chair in Communication. Together with Mora Matassi, doctoral student at Northwestern and executive producer of this podcast, we invite you to discover the journeys of scholars who are at the cutting edge of creating knowledge about Latinx communication across the Americas. These are our stories. Esas son nuestras historias. Estas son nuestras historias. Welcome everybody to El Café Latinx. We have an incredible speaker with us today. Jessica Retis is an associate professor in the School of Journalism at the University of Arizona, where she's also director of the master's program in bilingual journalism. Jessica has an extensive and highly successful career both in the academy and as a journalist. She has spanned multiple continents, the Americas, that's US, Latin America, Europe. She has done research in Japan. She has taught, at Cal State before going to Arizona. She's also taught in Europe, for instance, at Universidad Carlos III in Madrid. She's taught at the Tech in Monterrey, in Mexico. Has worked across all media that you can imagine, with the exception of online. She's done radio, television, newspapers, documentary film, magazine, etc. Received multiple honors for research, for teaching, for service. She's is a star, and because of that, we want to learn from her. So, Jessica, the first question I'd like to ask you is, how did it all begin for you? How was the start of the journey that really has brought you to where you are today, professionally speaking?
Yeah, I will go back to my high school time. And being a college professor, and after having taught for so many years in different universities, and especially when I was teaching in Cal State, I always discovered that advisor in high school that told that student, you're very good at writing, you're good, you can do this. And, for Latino students, it's so important to have this advisor. And I had those advisors when I was in high school. Of course, I was a reporter for my high school newspaper, right? And it was back in time, and when I began working as journalism professor, that I realized, that's right. I also had that advisor that encouraged me and told me, and she was from Uruguay, actually, my Spanish language literature teacher, and she was like, you have to write. You're a very good writer. You have to. She wanted me to write novels, right? But I ended up being a journalist, which is sort of a similar. Let's say we tell stories, and that was the very beginning when I started thinking about myself as a good writer. And then over the years, well, just realized that I like to tell stories. And now I work with the storytellers. I don't tell the stories because I'm a professor, but I edit their stories. I advise them on how to do that. And I love that my former students, some of them, of course, not all, they always call me. It's like, Prof, I have this story, and then what will be the best angle? And I enjoy that, engaging in that communication with my former students as well.
All right. So remind us. So it all began in high school, and where was high school geographically?
Yeah, for me, Lima. It was in
Lima.
Lima. It was in Lima, Peru. I'm Peruvian. And I studied in Lima High School. The school was called Lima High School, and then Maria Alvarado. And that's when I started learning English, actually, because it was a bilingual school. So I started learning there. And yeah, it was an incredible experience, just telling the stories about whatever was happening in my own high school, right?
Uh-huh. And then from there, you went to college where, Jessica?
I studied in the Universidad de Lima, Peru,
Mm-hmm.
and in the Faculty of Communications. And while I was studying my major, I was also working as a journalist for different print news media, basically magazines. I was a reporter, editor in chief. Then I directed a couple of projects. And because I have this voice, I was also a locutora. And I was in Lima, I did that. Then when I moved to Mexico, I was working as a correspondent for Peruvian newspapers, in especially in entertainment. It was very interesting because I was studying in the Masters of Political Science with all these critical understanding of Latin America, but I was interviewing Luis Miguel.
Well, that must have been interesting.
Yeah, that was very interesting because I was also working with Opción, which is a very interesting project in Mexico. It was started by professors from UAM, Xochimilco, and it was a group of people, Beatriz Solis, my mentor in Mexico. She's a huge name in Mexico. She's a professor there, and I was working with her, and I met there in Opción and met all the libros con patas. I like to say so, from Hector Schmuckler to you name it, Garcia Canclinio. All of them would come to these tertulias or to present books, and I also work with people in CONEIC and Felafax. So I started meeting really scholars that I read back in my years of as a college student, and then I started meeting them as a younger in that area. I my first edited book, actually working as an editor, not as a writer, editing, the process of editing graphics and all this part was with Raúl Fuentes, and his research was in la investigación in America Latina, research in Latin America. And I remember the way he would talk about the trends in research in Latin America and how I learned from whatever he wrote, right? That book is a yellow book that I have in my shelf, and it's the beginning of everything.
Wow, what a great story! And so you were in Mexico. You were both, working as a journalist and studying in communication.
Uh-huh.
And then you ended up going to Spain, right? For your
Yeah,
PhD.
that's an interesting story. So I lived in Mexico for 6 years. I studied the master's in Latin American studies, and my research was analysis of um, propaganda and media in Mexico in the Carlos Salinas de Gortari administration period. So from the election process to the end of the period. So I studied the PRONASOL, the Programa Nacional de Solidaridad, and how in this process of demand, how do you say that in English? Dismantling the public properties and selling and all these economic restructures of the nation states in Latin America, but specifically in Mexico. It was an interesting experience to see that and see the Programa Pronasol, which was mainly a project to help some people from the periphery for basic resources, and how the campaign was very useful for his image, his public image, right? And the relationship between El PRI and Televisa was a very interesting. It was for me the very beginning of understanding media and economics of media, and political communication, etc. That's when I started being fascinated by Noam Chomsky's critical perspective of Latin America, etc. So I was there. I was working also in several universities. I was working at El Nacional. That newspaper doesn't exist anymore, so I'm that old. Also was a freelancer for El Reforma, etc. And I was working at Universidad Intercontinental and then Instituto Tecnológico de Monterrey. And then I fell in love with a Spaniard.
Well, that's a great reason, isn't it?
He was also a professor at Tec de Monterrey, and we ended up going to Spain. And then when I was in Spain, I was like, oh, I should study my PhD, right? And then because I was already very, very curious about the Latin American realities, I wanted to keep digging into that area. So that's why I enrolled into the PhD in contemporary Latin America.
So was that in Madrid?
That was in Madrid. It was in an Instituto de Investigación Ortega y Gasset. It was a double degree with Instituto de Investigación Ortega y Gasset and Complutense. So actually my title is from Complutense de Madrid, and I have so many professors from Complutense. That was an eye-opening because then I realized how interested I was in Latin America. And while I was there, it was interesting because, life happens, right? And I was also a reporter for different magazines in Spain, but I also got a job as a producer and anchor in Televisión Educativa Iberoamericana. It was so many years ago and so many kilos less. So I was the anchor of Noticias Culturales Iberoamericanas, which was very interesting because it was a newsroom full of people from Latin America. So the fights that we had in trying to write a Spanish language that we all understood, it was fascinating, right? So no, I say hala, you say hala, you say. It was very interesting, and I had the greatest experience of my life there because I was also a producer for Canal Do. It was a channel where we did a lot of cultural productions, such as Club de Lectura, which was the beginning of, we didn't have internet at the time. It was a talk from Spanish language writers and different audiences in Latin America. So we have Isabel Allende, we have Chenique, we had Antonio Gala, you name it. Very, very interesting writers. And then we have these groups of different readers, reading communities, asking via his Passat their questions, and I was in charge of everything. That was very interesting. I was also producer of, it was a very beautiful telenovela that is called Patas del Alma, produced by Calandria, which you might know it's a very interesting cultural center, actually, and they produce this telenovela with a very social and important content for young people. So we will broadcast the series, and after the series, we will have discussion with people. And it was a producer with very low budget. So that was very interesting as well, because we would do everything from bringing people to the studio, from writing the scripts, from producing, from editing, from sending all the information away. And it was quite an experience. So it was in Agencia F, in the TV station of Agencia F. That was in Madrid. And then I also ended up being a reporter and producer for Red Con Voz, which it was a community-based radio station, and I was in charge of the productions about immigration. But it was interesting. It was co-productions with Argentina, with Ecuador, with Colombia, with Venezuela. So we would produce stories about immigration in radio, and it was co-produced, and it was distributed by ALER, Asociación Latinoamericana de Educación Radiofónica, and it also was part of the AMARC, the red of community radios in Spain.
Wow, what a,
I was in Valle Vallecas.
I mean, it's fascinating. If you've done, I mean, since getting to Mexico, it seems to me you've done both, research and, journalism and also, cultural production in parallel.
Yes,
Um,
that's why when you see my CV, you will see, oh, I did so many things here. And then also because I was working as a journalist to actually pay my tuition for my major, my master's, and my PhD. And I've been working in Cal State with so many working students. So I always tell them, I've been there. I've been a working student. I know how it works. I know that you don't have weekends. I know sometimes you need to finish your midterm paper and then go to work and the first shift. I've been there. It's challenging, but it's also a good opportunity for you to, to succeed in what you love or what you like, right?
Absolutely. And so how was it? Because you were in Spain,
Uh-huh.
and then did you go from Spain to Cal State? So did you come to the US from Spain? Did you go back
This
to?
this is going to be public, right? So I
Yes,
aware of what I'm going to
yes, it
tell
is.
about
Will
my
be
personal
public. Yes,
story.
it is.
So, well, it was interesting. At the time I got my PhD, I already had two kids, and they were. I had a baby and a toddler, and also, my partner. He was also in different jobs, etc. So at the time, I really wanted to explore other areas. So we started looking in different areas, and then I was looking actually for postdoc um, right opportunity. But at the time I was talking to people around, I realized that I could not only look for a postdoc, but also for a job, right? So it was at the time, Cal State Norte had the Spanish language minor in journalism, and they were looking for expanding their program, and they were looking for someone with experience in journalism, bilingual, with a PhD, and it was my profile, right? So it was interesting, and then well, I came to California, and then you know how it works, and then I give a talk in English and Spanish, and then I explain my research and my professional expertise, and we decided. Well, I got a job, and my husband got a job in his own field, and we just packed our things again, and then we crossed the Atlantic again. So that was interesting. I missed Mexico so much. So for me, going to LA was, oh, I'm back in Mexico, right? So my students were very surprised when I knew exactly what a pozole is, or what kind of tamal is the best one, or they were like, Prof, how come you're Peruvian? It's like, no, I'm Pemex. Pemex, the oil company, right? It's like Pemex. Yeah, I'm part Peruvian, I'm part Mexican. Oh, and then in Los Angeles, I started learning Central American accents. So I started meeting my Central American, and that was interesting because when I arrived to Los Angeles and I started working with my Latino students in California, I will meet with them. I was also the advisor for the student publication, the bilingual student publication, right? And they will go back and forth with the language, and they will use both languages at the same time. And I was, wait. English or Spanish? And they would laugh at me. It's like, no, I'm too old. I cannot do this. And like, Prof, we'll give you 6 months or a year, and you will be like us. And they were absolutely right. So we will go back and forth with languages, and it is the reality of Latinos. That's the life we live in, and it was very interesting because for me it was I speak only English or only Spanish until I became Latina, right? So that was very interesting. So I've been working in Cal State, and loving my students and learning how to be a better professor. And I realized that I also it was important for especially for my Latina students, to see in front of them in a classroom someone that they can relate to, that I speak English with an accent, and I'm here, that I have a master's and a PhD, and I'm here, and that I speak other languages, that I'm interested in other stuff, and I also had kids, but I always tell them it's okay to wait until you're older to have kids. It's okay if you decide not to have kids, or whatever you decide. You you own your life, right? So please go explore, study, get out of your comfort zone, and then go somewhere else, and then enjoy life. And it was very interesting for me to learn how to work in a Hispanic service institution with Latino students with this drive to learn and explore, and being able to help them and facilitate their learning experience. And I always tell them I learn more from you, from what I'm only older and have read a little bit more than you. That's it. But here, and I like to use Pablo Freire's perspective on education, right? You have to be a facilitator. I don't like this vertical perspective of I'm the one who knows everything and you're going to learn from me. It's not. It's like we are going to learn together. It's like you're younger, but you also have this knowledge that I can learn from you, right? So it was a very good experience, especially for my female students, because I realized that they were always interested in learning how I could do this, right? So how you move to one country to another, and then I'm also first generation college student, and then how you do this or that is like, I will always tell them, if I can do it, you can do it. So it is so important for Latino students to have Latino professors, Latinx professors, that they can understand that there is also a way for them in the academia, in the professional arena, and they are absolutely capable of doing that. But they just need support, they need information, they need people in the academia to understand their different realities, that some of them are working students, and then sometimes we need to adapt. But only having people like us in the academia understanding, or we have experience that they went through, I think is the only way to, promote more participation of Latinos, not only in newsrooms and in the profession, but also in the academia. We need more Latinos in higher education.
That's excellent. If I may sort of build on that. So, you are a first generation Latina who has succeeded in academia in Latin America, in Europe, in the US, right? So you're really at the top of the game. What's your secret sauce? I mean, what would you say were the main things that you did that might have helped you succeed so much, and that others, who are beginning their journeys or who might think about beginning their journeys, learn from?
I would say mentors.
Mhm.
Mentors. It's so important to have mentors along the way. In university, in my high school, I have those professors that told me, you're good, go for it. In my university, I recall Teresa Quiroz. I recall, oh my gosh, my professor. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking right now. He's a rector right now. Oh my gosh, I will remember his name. He was so encouraging for me, and also Javier Brotzel, Teresa Quiroz, and Oscar Quesada. Thank God, Oscar. Uh, uh, when I moved to Mexico, Teresa was so encouraging, right? And then I moved to Mexico, and I found Beatriz Solis, Luis Núñez Gornés, along the way in Spain, Francisco Sierra, my PhD dissertation. Um, I had this fantastic professor, Joaquin Arango. He's an expert on immigration in Spain. He allowed me to enter in his classes, and because I was studying Latin American studies, so I wasn't that aware of issues on migration, and he allowed me to go to his classes to learn about that. Um, I remember all these mentors and professors that really helped me out in pursuing my interests, right? So I would say it's a combination of mentors and then this idea of trying to dig into what your interests are and also into exploring new areas and not being afraid of exploring new areas. And along all these years, I will also say that my partner in life and in crime and in my house has been absolutely supportive of every single step that I make. He is an expert in immigration, not because he learned about that, but because he reads all my papers in Spanish and English. Whenever we are in a bar, and then immigration is a sexy topic, right? So people ask, "Oh, so how about that?" And people start asking. And my husband is like, "Oh, here she comes again," and I'm like, yeah, because sometimes as a joke, I tell him, "Okay, can you explain that?" And he's capable of explaining that because he reads every single of my publications, and I love him for so many reasons. But we're talking about the academia, right? I love him for this particular part that he spent with me, and then very supportive. You remember, Pablo, when you were doing your dissertation, those months that everybody asked you, you were supposed to finish a year ago, and you're still finishing your dissertation.
That's right. That's
Right?
right.
You were talking about finishing that some years ago. And then I remember one day when my scholarship ended, and I was like, okay, that's it. I'm not going to finish the dissertation, and we don't have the money anymore. I'm going to look for a job. And he would say, stop. Okay, we'll figure it out. But you have been suffering this thesis for so many years, and you're going to finish it because you're going to finish it. And we just sat and decided how we're going to do the budget, etc. Because I really needed one more year to finish, and we did it. But I couldn't have done this with his support, right? And moving from one country to another, we changed together 5 times, from Mexico to Spain, from Spain to the U.S., from the U.S. to Spain again, and then back to the U.S. again, from California. Now we are in Arizona. So it's so important to have a partner that supports you also, right? And walks with you in the journey. So I would say a combination of all these different elements.
It's excellent. And since you mentioned the topic of immigration, when one reads your papers and looks at your vita in general, there are 2 topics, at least to me, that are together. They're not exactly the same, but they are together, that have marked a lot of your intellectual journey, at least over the past more recent years. One is immigration, the other is bilingualism, right? And in very creative ways, because you've done research about the Latinx community in Japan, and try to very few people go that far, right? But it's true that in some parts of Latin America, it's a very important anchor, right? One can think Peru, in some parts of Brazil. So how did you choose those topics? How did you choose what to study? How was that process for you?
So it was interesting when when I arrived to Mexico, and I realized that I was well prepared in the sociological arena, but I wasn't that prepared in the political and economics areas, right? So I really wanted to dig into that, and I was very lucky. Mauro Marini, oh my gosh, the director of the, oh my gosh, Pablo, you're gonna make me cry. This is not supposed to happen, okay? Because I remember all these talks with these people that really pushed me. So Mauro Marini passed away, unfortunately. He explained me the reality of Brazil. He was Brazilian, and with him and other professors in at UNAM, I started realizing the importance of understanding politics and economics, but I always wanted to add the media aspect of that, right? That's why I ended up doing an analysis of propaganda and the media in Mexico. That was a master thesis that I actually didn't publish as a book, because after I defended it and I moved out to Spain. And that also happened with my dissertation in Spain. I already had an approval for publishing my dissertation as my thesis as a book. but I moved to the United States. So life happened in between. So I have my pending tasks for that. Someday maybe I will do that. But at that time in Mexico, I remember those conversations with Maura Marini, learning about Brazil. And then the other thing that happened that is that in my master's, I needed a third language to get my master's degree in Mexico. Now, I hated them so much because I already spoke English, and in Spanish, I thought it was enough. And they said, no, you have to have a third language. So I started learning Portuguese because I thought because I need to learn fast, it has to be a language that is similar to Spanish. So I was doubting between Italian and Portuguese, and say Portuguese because I love Brazilian telenovelas, etc. So now I speak Portuguese. So it was I had this beautiful, very smart professor. I don't remember her name. Pablo, you have warned me so I could write all the names of my mentors. And she will teach me how to sing different poems in Portuguese. And at the time I thought, okay, this is a wasting of my time because I'm learning a language that I'm not going to use anymore. Guess what? 25 years later, the majority of the Latin American immigrants in Japan are from Brazil. So I was able to interview my sources in Portuguese. My Portuguese is not perfect, but it's good enough for me to understand and get into the dialogue. I have been also in different aulas, how we call in Portuguese, in Brazil, and teach there. And so by the time I decided to go into another area of Latin America, so let's go from Mexico to Spain, two things happened. I was an immigrant in Spain. I was a journalist in Spain. And I was so surprised about the way Latin Americans were covered in Spanish newspapers and how little they know about the historical context, the economic context, etc. So somehow when it came to the moment to decide the topic that I wanted to explore for my thesis in a PhD, I decided I want to do immigration, Latin America, and representation in the press. And it was very interesting because I remember Joaquin Arango, Carlos Malamud. I was Carlos Malamud, also a professor in Latin American studies, Argentinian, by the way. I told to them I want to do this thesis in immigration, and they say, okay, good news and bad news. Good news is a very interesting topic because it's new, we're receiving immigrants. Bad news, there's not that much written. So I had to go to the census office and write how many Argentinians we had in 42, 71, how many Cubans. Now everything is available on the internet, right? With a click, you have all the information, but I had to go to the Eurostat, the statistics office of the European Union in Spain, and it was challenging. It was challenging also to be subject and object of my own area. I was lucky enough that the group of Peruvians didn't grow as much at this time. So the three groups that I studied were Ecuadorians, Colombians, and Argentinians. The three groups that grew the longest during the change of the century, which is the period of my analysis. So with the guidance of Francisco Sierra, he's a professor at the Universidad de Sevilla, we had so many fights, I remember, because in a good sense, right? Because I wanted to do an interdisciplinary study of this. So I wanted to analyze the coverage in news media, so discourse analysis. I also wanted to understand the different groups of mainstream media in Spain, so political economy of media. I wanted to understand sociology of production of media, so interviews with journalists. I also wanted to understand the news consumption, so focus groups. So it was all in one. And I was able to do everything but my interviews with the Spanish journalists. And we had so many fights in that. I want to do my interviews. And he was like, you cannot do the interviews because you are a Latin American immigrant. So you need to train interviewers. It's not that I didn't conduct the interviews. I did that, but I trained other doctorate students with my, the guide of questions, and they were all Spaniards. And we did everything, and then they did interviews at the time. It was very important for the objective of the study, right? They need to have another Spaniard in the communication so they could talk about. And it was very, and it was, in the bar waiting for the call, right? Said yes, they were talking about this and then and this, just you can demonstrate all your hypotheses. It was very interesting. So that's the only part that I couldn't do it, but it made sense at the time. Now I'm very grateful because of that. I could understand how hard it was also for Spanish journalists to understand a very complex reality. So, and that's when I discovered, okay, I need to work on training journalists. So I started working with ACNUR and then SEAR in different workshops where I would train journalists to understand why Spain was receiving Latin American immigrants. And it was very interesting because I would work with them, and then we will have like 35 journalists enrolled, right? And then 4 would show up because they had to go somewhere else because of this and that. The journalist is very hard to have a schedule. So with the few that we could have anytime we did these workshops, it was very interesting because I had these different reporters saying, but if I have this good story about how well they get along, Ecuadorians and Spaniards, my editor is not going to buy that story, right? Because the trend is to do social conflict journalism, and which is why I love this new trend of solutions journalism, and we're going to have a training this Friday on that, because I think there's also a way to tell people around that the society need immigrants because of so many reasons. And the majority of the immigrants are in a particular country because they just want to work and they just want to raise their families, etc. But unfortunately, news media tend to portray them as the reason of social conflict. So I just wanted to do that. So I published this, and it was very interesting because when we compare the different ways that Spanish press will portray Ecuadorians, Colombians, and Argentinians, I discovered these different ways of viewing Latin America. So it was a frightened view of Colombians, as if they mostly were from, sicarios or narcotraffic or prostitutes, and when the reality was the majority of Colombians in Spain were middle class and very well educated. Mm-hmm. And with Ecuadorians, it was this idea of compassion, right? That they are poor and they are suffering this being poor, and this is why we're receiving Ecuadorians. When in reality, it was the end of the Ecuadorian miracle. What happened, and this is the liaison between Spain and Ecuador, and then the first groups of people from Ecuador were middle class also, and sometimes we were school teachers, just wanted to work in Spain. Whereas when I started analyzing the stories about news coverage of Argentinians, was the only case that I saw in-depth reporting and headlines that would say middle classes in Argentina suffering from the financial crisis, and then they are leaving the country because blah, blah, blah. So it was very interesting to see how when they talk about Colombians and Ecuadorians, they didn't see the same reality that they saw in Argentina, right? And then it was very interesting to compare these realities. Yeah.
Very interesting. So then, I mean, you are multilingual, not just bilingual. You are multicultural, have lived in many places. Is that why you have such a keen understanding of difference and diversity, would you say? I mean, because it's striking. I mean, it's something that you emphasize in your research, and the program that you are building in Arizona is based on that. It's 2 languages, not 1, which is a remarkable cultural change for U.S. institutions, right? To finally, wake up to that reality. Mm-hmm. Do you think your trajectory has, as a person, as a scholar, or as a media professional, that made you sort of aware and sort of more sensitive to the realities of heterogeneity and diversity in the Latinx experience?
Yes. It's all these experiences, and actually we the title of the master is bilingual journalism.
Mhm.
We're going to start with Spanish and English, but we have the option of Portuguese
Oh,
as well. So what we want to do, and this is the philosophy behind this master's program. We live in Tucson, and people here, they speak native languages. So we should be able to incorporate those as well. So, and then Latinos also, they can speak other languages, right? I wish I was fluent in Quechua. That's my to-do list,
mhm.
right? So the idea for the program is, okay, we're going to start with Spanish and also Portuguese because, well, I speak Portuguese, and then we have other colleagues who speak Portuguese, and we have uh, Portuguese-speaking professors also in Latin American Studies, in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. But the idea is for the program to have the possibility to embrace being multilingual. And the idea of understand if you want to produce a story in the language of your sources is because you are entering in this conversation with these communities, right? So I think especially in a place like Tucson, like it's very diverse, and then Native Americans groups are um, excellent in the relation with the land and the nature. And also we have the Native American studies here in the university. So we should be able to embrace all these possibilities that we have in the university and incorporate them into the journalism practice and the journalism studies as well. So that's the idea that we have in mind. We're going to have some core courses, but depending on the students, we're going to tailor their electives towards whatever they want to do. So we have Native American students. They should be able to produce in English and in a native language as well.
That's fascinating. And going from the university to the field, right? How do you see the field of communication and media studies in relation to these issues of difference, multiculturalism, multilingualism, or
Mhm.
multilingualism? Sorry about that. What has been your experience thinking about the global field? Because you've seen, communication studies in Latin America, say in Peru and Mexico. You also have seen it in Spain. Now you work in the US. You are very active and successful in the main leading professional organizations in the field. How do you see the field of communication and media studies in relation to these trends that we've been discussing?
I see challenges and opportunities. I
Okay.
see challenges in the way that we don't have as many Latinx scholars as we should if we compare with the demographics of the country. And we can talk about it for hours. And I just show a couple of pieces of information. We have an issue not only in enrolling, but in retention. We have a problem in general in the universities in the United States. Retention is our goal because for several reasons, right? So, and I think the more we have more scholars and the more we support Latino students going for undergrad, first of all, we need to get them into undergrad, and then from undergrad to grad studies, the more professors, I see like yourself and myself, Pablo, and all the Latino scholars that you have this beautiful lineup that you have for your series, right? The role that they have, not only for the research that they do, the critical understanding of the society, but their only presence is important, right? So I think a challenge there. We need to have more Latinx scholars in the field. And the opportunities, I see them in this way. When you are part of the community, you also feel the social responsibility of advancing in the field. So it's like a natural consequence, right? So that's why we have those few scholars that are so talented, doing excellent job, and then criticizing the reality from, and this is important, from an empowered position, right? So, and this is important because we need to also teach the students that it is important because academia, especially in the social field, is not accepting, right? We have our different positions regarding the society. We can be very critical, we can be more conservative. That's okay. Everybody, we're free to choose our different experiences, but it is important to understand that all these, for example, let's say the critical race theory, how that has been influencing also Latino critical race theory, and how we have so many scholars that are working also in the Latino media critical race theory. I'm thinking on my good friend Mari Castañeda, right? And
Yes.
we are starting the field, and then we have all these other professors that are doing these gender studies. I'm thinking Marilena Cepeda, Angara Valdivia. So I see opportunities, and I see, and I'm very glad to see the growth of this, and see the collaboration. For example, you started your center, and we are here, right? You just invite us, and we're yes, let's do it, because
Absolutely.
I think instead of seeing us as competitive, I think it's a collaboration. This is an opportunity. The more we collaborate, the stronger we work in the field. And I see that's the opportunity that I see, no? And then we can inspire your student, my students, Valdivia's students, Cepeda's students, right? So we can embrace. And I'm thinking not only in Latino students, I'm thinking also in non-Latino students interested in issues of diversity, which is very important also to be aware of their position and how they have the opportunity also to work towards a more inclusive, right, society, not only society in general, but the academic society, which is sometimes has its own issues, right?
Absolutely. That's great. So that leads us to my final question. Something which I like to ask all the guests in this podcast. So if you have magical powers, right, and could be granted one wish about how you'd like the field of communications and media studies to change, what would you wish for?
Do we have 24 hours for this?
Let's say 22.
So I wish for the field what I wish for my own society, to be a more inclusive society, to be a more respectful society, to be aware of how we have been evolving for so many years. And the more we advance in the society, the more we have the opportunity to make our world a better world. Call me romantic. This is how I feel it. That's why I'm in the academia, because I think we have here we have the opportunity to work with students to prepare them to be critical with the society, learn about the past, and then create a better be critical with the present to have a better future, right? So we cannot stop thinking about, unfortunately, it's a commonplace, but that another world is possible. I believe that we all have different, if we were in the engineering field, well, there's a possibility to do that also area with a critical perspective. But media is also important. And that's another thing that for me is very important. Sometimes people tend to think that media studies or journalism are not that important because they are not working with, hard sciences, etc. And I truly believe that it's so important because we're dealing with the social reality. We're dealing with professionals. We deal with discourses. We deal with public opinion. We deal with representation. And those elements are as important as other fields. It's not less, no more, but they are also important. So I think it's important to keep advancing in these type of projects as well.
All right, Jessica, what a great time that I've had learning from you, speaking with you. It's been truly a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom, your experiences with us. And I invite our listeners to stay tuned for the next episode of El Café Latinx. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gracias.
El Café Latinx is a production of the Center for Latinx Digital Media in the Department of Communication Studies at Northwestern University. I am Pablo Boczkowski, your host, and I'm joined by executive producer Mora Matasi.